WFYI podcast brought to you by Bloomington, Indiana, an American college town offering food and drink, college sports, outdoor activities, live music, cool art, and good times daily. Everyone is welcome in Bloomington. More information at visitbloomington.com.
This is WFYI News Now. It's March 26th, and I'm Darian Benson. On today's show, you've got 2 weeks to register to vote in this year's primary election. A new law could weaken debt protections for Hoosiers, and about half of Indiana high school graduates head to college, a significant decline over the last 15 years. But leaders say there are some bright spots in higher education.
We've been sixth best at holding tuition down in Indiana.
Those stories coming up, but first, a WFYI investigation that found some schools aren't accurately reporting how often they forcibly isolate and restrain students has prompted the passage of a new state law. From WFYI's education desk, Lee Gaines reports the new law prohibits schools from using timeout, except as a last resort.
Republican Representative Becky Cash was the initial author of the legislation. She says she was inspired to pass it in part because of a WFYI investigation that found that some schools weren't accurately reporting seclusions and restraints, nor were they being held accountable for that. Cash says she heard from families who say their schools were secluding their children and calling it a timeout.
They can literally use the same rooms that they're using for seclusion, except that technically the child can open the door, even if they don't know they can open the door, even if they're afraid to open the door.
The new law requires schools to only use timeouts in situations where safety is at risk, and they must now document it and report it to a student's parent or guardian. I'm Lee Gaines.
You have 2 weeks left to register if you want to vote in this year's primary election. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports on what you need to know to cast a ballot this spring.
You can register to vote online, by mail, or in person. Online, you can visit indianavoters.com. If you've already registered, you can use that site to check your registration, see who's on your ballot, and find out where you can vote. Registering by mail requires sending a voter registration form to your local election administrator's office or the Indiana Election Division. You can also deliver that form in person to your local election office or to the BMV when you're getting a driver's license, permit, or ID card. When registering, you have to provide some proof of residence. The easiest way to do that is by submitting your driver's license or state ID number or the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. You can also provide proof of residence via a current utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck, or government document that shows your name and address. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
Recent legislation signed into law could weaken debt protections for Hoosiers. As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Violet Comber-Weiland reports, one advocate expresses concern for 2 bills from the 2024 legislative session that were signed by the governor.
One bill will limit the statute of limitations, or period of time Hoosiers have to dispute certain charges from their banks, from 6 years to 2 years. Erin Macy is the director of the Indiana Community Action Poverty Institute. She says another bill will allow banks to make changes to Hoosiers' bank accounts if they don't respond to written notices.
One of the things we expect to happen immediately is that Hoosiers will likely receive an arbitration agreement that will prohibit them from taking cases to court or joining a class action. Instead, they will have to deal with any issues they have through an arbitrator.
She says this will limit Hoosiers' abilities to hold banks accountable for unfair charges. Macy urges Hoosiers to keep in contact with her organization about any changes they see once this legislation goes into effect in July. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Violet Comber-Weiland.
And for our final story today, about half of Indiana high school graduates head to college, a significant decline over the last 15 years. The falling enrollment rate is a worrying trend at a time when the state is attempting to increase the number of people with college degrees and post-secondary credentials. From WFYI's education desk, reporter Peers McCoy spoke with Indiana Commissioner for Higher Education Chris Lowery about college affordability and why young people are skipping higher education.
Experts say that more and more jobs are going to require higher education in the future. Yet the number of Indiana high school graduates choosing to go directly to college has been declining. It's fallen by 13 percentage points since 2008. What do you think is driving the decline in college enrollment?
Yeah, we think there are a number of factors. Chief among those factors that we have seen in research include affordability, and I think that's you really have to pull that apart. Sometimes there's the perception of it, and sometimes there's the reality of it. Maybe we can dig into that later. There is a questioning around career relevance. If I do X, will I be able to get this type of job? Most people have a job or a career in mind when they do some form of post-secondary training and education, so something beyond high school. Most people have, a plan. So there are questions amongst individuals. Will I get the outcomes that I'm looking for? And then, the other, I think, concerns that we hear, it's sort of a longer list. Is it accessible to me? Is it nearby? Some of those other factors in life.
What do you say to people who say, look, I know people who got a college degree and it just saddled them with a lot of debt?
What we've been trying to do, especially in the last year or so, is provide a lot more in terms of facts around affordability and also outcomes. So here are a couple of different things. One, Indiana's public institutions has been doing a really good job in the last now dozen or so years of holding tuition costs down. Tuition rises have just been a big story nationally, and they should be. But in Indiana, we didn't realize this until last year, and we started digging into the data. We've been sixth best at holding tuition down in Indiana. But I think we had done kind of a lousy job of letting folks know, first of all, we're trying to hold those costs down in Indiana. Secondly, Indiana is first in the Midwest and fifth in the nation in need-based financial aid.
A lot of this conversation about higher education focuses on 2- and 4-year degrees, but Indiana has actually put a lot of attention on other kinds of post-secondary education. For example, the state pays for students to earn certificates in high-demand fields like healthcare and information technology. What kind of enrollment trends are we seeing in those areas?
Prior to coming to the commission, not quite 2 years ago, I had led the workforce and career side of Ivy Tech Community College. Ivy Tech placed an incredible emphasis on that sub-associate degree space, industry certifications, certificates, generally 18 to 21 academic hours, technical certificates, generally around 30 hours, and said, look, we are going to lean into this. Indiana is fifth in the nation in sub-associate degree credentials. So to answer your question, it has been enormous, the increase in focus on enrollment, and then I think even more importantly, the completion and awarding of those credentials.
Thank you so much for your time, Commissioner Lowery. I really appreciate you sitting down with me.
Dylan, thank you.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Abriana Herron, Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Darian Benson. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you liked today's episode, remember to subscribe and share. And follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.